Hey everyone, welcome back. Today I want to tell you a story, but not just any story. It's the kind of story that will make you question how well you really know the people closest to you. Imagine planning a dream family vacation for months, only to find out they went without you. Sounds unbelievable, right? But for Jessica, this wasn't just a trip. It was the moment she realized she had spent her whole life being the afterthought in her own family. What happened next? Well, Jessica didn't cry. She didn't beg. She decided to change everything. Stay with me because by the end of this story, you might find yourself questioning who truly deserves a place in your life. Now, let me tell you what happened to revenge Jessica. It was almost midnight when Jessica's phone buzzed on her nightstand. She wasn't expecting anyone to message her at that hour. In fact, she had just finished folding the last load of laundry, exhausted from another 12-hour shift at the diner. She glanced at the screen, thinking it might be a work notification or some useless spam. But it wasn't. The message was from her mother. "Sweetheart, we need to talk about the trip. We've decided to postpone it until next year. We just can't afford it right now." Jessica sat there, staring at the glowing text, her heart sinking like a stone in her chest. Postponed. Well, that couldn't be right. For months, she had been counting down the days to this family vacation, their first in years. She had rearranged her entire life to make it possible, picked up extra shifts, skipped weekends, said no to dinners, nights out, everything, just to save enough money to make it happen. Every night when she came home dead tired, she reminded herself, "It'll be worth it when we're together." And now, postponed. Her fingers hovered over the screen as her mind raced. Maybe there was a mistake. Maybe something urgent came up. Maybe she didn't know. But what she did know was that something felt off. Her parents had been so excited about the trip. So why now? Without thinking, she tapped her mom's contact and called. The phone rang twice before her mother picked up, her voice soft but distant. "Jessica, I know you're disappointed." Jessica tried to keep her voice steady. "Mom, what's going on? We've been planning this for months. I've worked extra shifts just to help cover the cost. What happened?" Her mother sighed on the other end of the line, the kind of sigh that said the decision had already been made. "Honey, things are just tight right now. Your father and I talked about it. We thought it'd be best to wait until next year." Jessica swallowed hard, the familiar taste of disappointment settling in the back of her throat. She understood money struggles. God knew she lived paycheck to paycheck, scraping together enough to keep her bills paid and this trip afloat. But something about the way her mom said it, like it was already done, like her feelings didn't even factor into the equation, felt like a punch to the gut. She took a breath, trying to keep her voice calm. "If it's about the money, Mom, maybe we can make it work another way. We don't have to stay at that fancy resort. We can shorten the trip. I can even cover my own airfare. I was really looking forward to this." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Hesitation. Jessica caught it. That half-second gap that told her more than words ever could. Then her mother's voice came back, soft but firm. "Jessica, just not the right time. We'll make it happen next year. I promise." Promise. One that felt empty the moment it left her mother's lips. Jessica forced a small laugh, one that sounded more like a sigh. "Okay, Mom. If that's what you've decided." Her mom didn't notice the way her voice cracked. She just said, "I knew you'd understand." Jessica hung up a few minutes later, staring at the dark screen of her phone. Understand. She always understood. She had spent her entire life understanding. But that night, lying in her small apartment, the weight of exhaustion pressing against her chest, something inside her cracked. This wasn't just a vacation being postponed. It was another reminder that in her family, her feelings were always the ones easiest to set aside. And Jessica couldn't shake the feeling that something about this story didn't add up. 3 days later, Jessica was on her lunch break at the cafe where she worked. The midday rush had finally died down, and she sat behind the counter with a lukewarm cup of coffee, scrolling mindlessly through her phone. She wasn't looking for anything in particular, Just something to fill the silence. That's when her thumb froze. There it was. A photo she hadn't expected to see. One that made her stomach drop to the floor. Her parents. Her younger brother, David. All of them smiling, standing on a beach. The same beach they were supposed to visit together. The same trip they had told her was postponed. For a second, Jessica thought maybe it was an old photo. Maybe a memory from years ago. But then she noticed the date on the post. Yesterday. Her chest tightened as she stared at the screen, her pulse pounding in her ears. She scrolled down, hoping, praying that it was a mistake, some misunderstanding. But the next photo hit her even harder. David and his girlfriend on a boat, laughing, drinks in their hands. Her parents at a fancy seafood restaurant, plates of lobster and oysters in front of them. Another beach selfie, all of them sun-kissed, smiling like they didn't have a care in the world. And then, the caption that shattered everything. Family time is priceless. Jessica felt her throat tighten, her breath catching. She blinked at the screen, her hands suddenly cold. Family time. Except she wasn't there. The trip wasn't postponed. It wasn't about money. They had gone without her. She stared at the photos, each one a punch to the gut, and something inside her cracked wide open. For weeks, she had worked herself to the bone for this trip. She'd put in every extra hour, skipped every night out, all because she wanted one thing, to be with her family, to feel like she belonged. And here they were, living her dream vacation without her, smiling like she never existed. Jessica's mind raced, trying to piece together the timeline. The late-night text. Her mother's soft, rehearsed voice on the phone. The hesitation when she had offered solutions. It all made sense now. It had never been about the money. They just didn't want her there. Her throat burned, and she quickly locked her phone, shoving it into her apron pocket as a customer approached the counter. She forced herself to smile, to go through the motions, but her head was spinning, her heart pounding against her ribs. When her shift ended, she sat alone at a corner table, phone in hand, staring at the images again. And the more she scrolled, the clearer it became. This wasn't a simple oversight. It was a choice. A decision they made without her. For years, Jessica had bent over backward for her family. She had always been the one who understood, who stayed behind, who cleaned up the messes and made the sacrifices. And now she knew why it always felt like she came second. 'Cause she did. The pictures weren't just photos of a beach vacation. They were proof of everything she'd been too afraid to admit her whole life. Her family didn't see her. Not really. She had always been the one left out of the frame. That afternoon, as the cafe emptied and the sun dipped behind the buildings, Jessica made herself a quiet, burning promise. This wasn't just about a trip anymore. This was about every time they made her feel invisible. And she wasn't going to let it slide this time. That night, Jessica lay awake in her small apartment, the glow of the streetlights seeping through the curtains. Her phone sat face down on the nightstand, but she didn't need to look at it. She could still see the images burned into her mind. Her parents laughing on the beach, David posing with his girlfriend on a boat, the caption that echoed in her ears like a cruel joke. Family time is priceless. Her chest felt heavy, like there was a weight pressing down on her ribs. And as the silence stretched around her, memories she hadn't invited began to surface. This wasn't the first time she had felt this way. She thought back to all the Christmas mornings when David's presents were wrapped in bright, expensive paper. The latest gaming console, the shoes he wanted, the watch he'd casually mentioned. And hers. A sweater 2 sizes too big. A gift card to a store she never shopped at, something clearly grabbed at the last minute. She remembered her birthdays year after year when plans were forgotten or rescheduled because someone had work, or because David's soccer tournament ran late, or because it just wasn't a good time. She used to tell herself it didn't matter, that she was grown, that birthdays were for kids. But it did matter. Every time she had swallowed her disappointment, she had smiled and said, "It's okay, I understand." Because that's who she was. The one who understood. The one who made it easier for everyone else. She thought back to the countless family dinners where David's stories filled the conversation, where every achievement of his, big or small, was celebrated like a parade. And when she mentioned her new job, her promotion, the fact that she'd been working double shifts to keep things afloat, nod. Maybe a polite, "That's great, honey," before the attention shifted back to her brother. Jessica stared at the ceiling, the memories swirling in her head like a storm she could no longer quiet. This trip wasn't the first betrayal. It was just the one she couldn't ignore anymore. Because this time they hadn't just forgotten her birthday. They hadn't just brushed her aside at dinner. This time they had built memories without her. They had laughed and smiled and made plans, and deliberately chosen not to include her. And worse, they had lied. Jessica closed her eyes and took a slow, shaky breath. All these years she had convinced herself that if she worked harder, if she gave more, if she stayed quiet and understanding, one day they would finally see her. One day she would finally matter. But tonight, lying alone in the dark, the truth settled over her like cold air. They had never seen her. They never would, not unless she made them. A part of her wanted to cry, to scream, to call her mother and demand to know why. But another part, a stronger, fiercer part of her, felt something else stirring. For the first time in her life, she was done pretending. Jessica sat up in bed, her decision clear. She wasn't going to let them come back from that vacation and act like nothing had happened. She wasn't going to smile and nod and sweep it under the rug like she always did. They thought she would stay quiet like she always had. But not this time. This time they would have to face what they had done. Because Jessica was done being the afterthought. The taxi pulled up to the front of her parents' house just after sunset. Jessica watched from the kitchen window, her arms folded tightly across her chest, her jaw clenched. She could see them, her mom, her dad, and David, dragging their suitcases up the driveway, sun-kissed and smiling, still wearing the glow of the vacation they had lied about. Jessica's heart thudded in her chest, but her face stayed calm, cold even. She had rehearsed this moment 100 times in her head. The front door swung open, and her mom was the first to see her. "Oh, Jessica," her mom said brightly, like nothing had happened, like she hadn't just betrayed her own daughter. "Sweetheart, I missed you. How have you been?" Jessica forced a tight smile, her arms still folded. "Busy," she said flatly. Her dad walked in behind her mother, setting his bags down by the door. "That's good. How's work?" Jessica let out a short, bitter laugh. "Work? Oh, same old. Serving coffee, saving up for trips that don't happen." Her mom's smile flickered, but she kept up the cheerful act. David yawned and stretched, clearly exhausted from his week in paradise. "Man, I'm wiped," he said, smirking. "Traveling takes it out of you. Hope you held down the fort while we were gone." Jessica's eyes snapped to him. "While we were gone." Like it was normal. Like nothing was wrong. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. No more pretending. "So," she said casually, "how was the trip?" Her mom blinked, a hesitation in her smile. "Oh, well, we just needed a little getaway. Nothing too special." Jessica's lips twitched into a smile, but there was no warmth in it. "Nothing special, huh?" Before her mother could answer, Jessica reached for her phone on the kitchen counter. She unlocked it and, without a word, turned the screen toward them. There on the screen was the Facebook album, the beach photos, the boat ride, the fancy dinner, the caption that still made her stomach churn. "Family time is priceless." Jessica tilted her head slightly, her voice calm but sharp. "Looks pretty special to me." The room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. Her mom's smile vanished. Her dad shifted uncomfortably. David groaned. "Oh my God, Jessica," he said, rolling his eyes. "Are you seriously making this a big deal?" "It was just a trip." Jessica's calm cracked. The words hit her like a slap. Just a trip. The trip she had rearranged her life for. Saved every penny for. Dreamed about. Her eyes snapped to her brother, then to her parents. "You lied to me," she said quietly, her voice shaking with restrained anger. "You told me it was postponed. that you couldn't afford it. And then I find you all living it up on the beach without me." Her mom shook her head quickly. "Honey, it wasn't like that." "Yes," Jessica cut her off, her voice rising. "It was exactly like that." Her dad stepped forward. "Sweetheart, please. It wasn't personal." Jessica laughed bitterly. "Not personal. You excluded me from my own family's vacation and lied to my face about it. How is that not personal?" Her mom tried to reach for her hand. "Jessica, we didn't mean to hurt you." Jessica pulled away. "No," she said firmly. "You didn't mean to get caught. That's the difference." She looked at them all, her mom's nervous smile, her dad's guilty eyes, David's dismissive smirk, and something inside her finally snapped. "This isn't just about the trip," she said, her voice low but sharp. "This is about every single time I've been the afterthought. Every holiday where David got what he wanted and I got whatever was convenient. Every birthday you forgot. Every time I showed up for you, and you didn't even notice." Her mom's face crumbled, but Jessica didn't stop. "I've spent my whole life trying to be enough for you," she said, her voice cracking. "Trying to earn a place in this family." She shook her head, swallowing back the lump in her throat. "But I finally get it now." Without another word, she grabbed her purse and walked to the door. "Jessica, wait," her dad called after her. She didn't look back. "I'm done," she said quietly. "I'm done being the afterthought." And with that, she walked out, leaving them standing there in stunned silence, for the first time forced to face what they had done. The days that followed felt heavier than Jessica expected. First it was quiet. Too quiet. Then the flood began. Her phone lit up with messages and missed calls, one after another, like waves crashing against a dam. Her mom's texts came first. "Jessica, please call me. You're overreacting. It was just a trip." Then her dad chimed in. "Ignoring us isn't going to change anything. Let's just talk." And of course David. "Seriously, you're acting like a child. It wasn't that deep." Jessica read every message, every dismissal, every attempt to minimize what they'd done, and she didn't reply to a single one. She had spent her entire life being the one who made things right. The one who apologized first. The one who forgave without ever being asked. Not this time. By the third day, their tone started to shift. The dismissiveness faded, replaced by guilt-soaked pleas. "Sweetheart, please don't shut us out. We miss you. We didn't mean to hurt you." Jessica stared at those words, her chest tight but her hands steady. She knew what this was. It wasn't real regret. It was discomfort. They weren't sorry for what they did. They were sorry they got caught. Sorry that, for the first time, Jessica wasn't smoothing things over. Each message felt like a hook, trying to drag her back into the role she had always played. The fixer, the forgiver, the afterthought who never demanded more. But she didn't bite. On the fifth day, something inside her shifted. She had spent the last week drowning in their voices, their excuses, their guilt trips, and suddenly, she realized she wanted none of it. She wanted silence. So she made a decision. That evening, Jessica sat at her small kitchen table, her laptop open, scrolling through listings. Not family vacations, not group getaways. A trip for herself. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere far. Somewhere where no one could reach her. Her eyes landed on a cabin tucked away in the mountains, surrounded by trees and nothing else. She booked it without hesitation. She didn't tell anyone. No text. No updates. No explanation. The next morning she packed a bag, grabbed her keys and left. The drive was long, winding through empty highways and quiet country roads. And with every mile, something inside her began to loosen. The tension in her shoulders. The heaviness in her chest. The constant, gnawing question of whether she mattered. By the time she reached the cabin, tucked away beneath towering pines, the silence felt like freedom. There was no one demanding her attention. No one asking her to understand. No one reminding her, in 1,000 little ways, that she was never enough. Just her. Finally. That first night, she sat outside on the cabin porch, a cup of tea in her hands, listening to the wind rustling through the trees. Her phone buzzed beside her. Another message from her mom. "Jessica, please. Just talk to us." She stared at the screen for a long moment. And then, for the first time in her life, she turned it off. The silence was uncomfortable at first, like an empty room echoing too loudly. But as the stars appeared one by one above her, Jessica realized something. That silence wasn't empty at all. It was hers, and for the first time it felt like peace. "Before we continue, I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt like Jessica, like you were the one always giving, always showing up, but somehow left out when it mattered most? Drop a comment below and tell me. Have you ever been treated like an afterthought by the people you love? I'll be reading your thoughts because your story matters too." Now, let's get back to what Jessica did next. And trust me, it's something her family never saw coming. It had been nearly 3 weeks since Jessica walked out of her parents' house and into the silence she had chosen for herself. 3 weeks of unanswered calls. 3 weeks of ignored texts. 3 weeks of living without the weight of their excuses or the guilt they tried to push onto her. And she wasn't sure she had ever felt lighter. Until that Saturday afternoon. The knock came quietly at first, almost hesitant. Then again, firmer but not demanding. Jessica stood in her living room, her stomach sinking even before she looked through the window and saw them. Her parents. Her mom stood there clutching her purse like a lifeline, her eyes anxious. Her dad shifted awkwardly beside her, hands stuffed deep in his pockets, like he wasn't sure he belonged there. Jessica took a deep breath, her fingers tightening around the edge of the kitchen counter. She knew this moment was coming. She opened the door slowly, standing in the doorway without inviting them in. Her mom's face lit up nervously. "Hi, sweetheart." Jessica's voice was cool, almost detached. "Are you here to actually listen or just to tell me why I'm wrong for being upset?" Her mom's smile faltered. Her dad cleared his throat. "We're here to talk," he said quietly. "Really talk." Jessica studied them for a long moment, weighing whether she even wanted to let them in. Finally, she stepped back, leaving the door open. "Fine." They moved inside carefully, like strangers stepping into foreign territory. Jessica didn't offer them coffee. She didn't ask how they'd been. She sat on the couch across from them, arms folded tightly across her chest, waiting. The silence between them was thick, heavier than anything they'd shared before. Her mom was the first to speak. "I don't even know where to start," she admitted, her voice small. "The truth is a good place," Jessica said flatly. Her mom winced, glancing down at her hands. Her dad rubbed the back of his neck. "We lied," he said finally, his voice gruff. "When we said the trip was postponed, it wasn't true. No excuses, no soft words, just the truth laid bare." Jessica swallowed the lump in her throat, her heart pounding. "Why?" she asked, her voice sharper than she intended. Her mom hesitated. "We thought it would be easier." Jessica let out a bitter laugh. "Easier for who?" "For you." The question hung in the air like a blade. Her dad shook his head slowly. "We didn't think it would hurt you this much." Jessica's eyes snapped to him, sharp and unblinking. "No, you didn't think at all." Her mother's eyes shimmered, but Jessica didn't soften. She leaned forward, her voice low and cutting. "Tell me something. If I hadn't seen the photos, would you have ever told me the truth?" The silence that followed felt like the loudest thing in the room. Her parents glanced at each other, and in that look, Jessica got her answer. She sat back, nodding once, like the final piece of the puzzle had clicked into place. "I thought so." Her mom's voice broke. "Jessica, we never wanted to hurt you." Jessica cut her off, her voice quiet but firm. "You didn't care if you did. There's a difference." Her dad sighed heavily. "We don't know how to fix this." Jessica shook her head. "That's not my job anymore." She stood, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "I've spent my whole life trying to be enough for you. Trying to earn my place. Trying to fix what you broke." She looked them both in the eye. "But I'm done being the one who fixes everything. Her mom wiped at her eyes. Then what do we do now? Jessica shrugged, walking to the door. That's up to you. She didn't slam the door when they left. She didn't cry. She just stood there, staring at the empty space where they had been, the weight of their silence still hanging in the air. But for the first time, it wasn't her burden to carry. Weeks passed, and Jessica stayed silent. It wasn't easy at first. The old habit clawed at her. The instinct to pick up the phone, to send a message, to smooth things over like she always had. For years, she had been the one to reach out first, to fix, to forgive without ever being asked. But this time she didn't. Days turned into weeks, and her phone stayed quiet. No missed calls, no messages, just an empty screen and an even emptier ache in her chest. Each day that passed without a word felt like a confirmation. That's the proof I needed, she thought. If she wasn't the one holding the family together, there would be nothing. It hurt more than she wanted to admit. She filled her days with work, her evenings with books and long walks, trying to convince herself that she didn't care, that she didn't need them. But the truth was, a small, fragile part of her had hoped they would fight for her. It wasn't until the third week that everything shifted. On a Tuesday evening, as she was washing dishes, her phone rang. Her mom's name flashed on the screen. Jessica stared at it, her breath catching in her throat. She didn't answer. A few minutes later, a text followed. "Hey sweetheart. Just thinking about you. Hope you're okay." Jessica didn't respond right away. She wasn't sure if she even wanted to. Was it genuine? Or just another attempt to make themselves feel better? The next day, another text came through. This time from her dad. "Miss you, kid. Let us know if you want to get dinner sometime." Jessica stood in her kitchen, staring at the screen, the words blurring slightly. For the first time in years, they weren't asking for her to do something. They weren't talking about David. They weren't making excuses. They were trying. Cautiously, clumsily, but they were trying. She waited 2 days before replying. Dinner could be fine. They responded almost immediately, setting a date and time. No pressure, no demands. When she arrived at the small Italian restaurant, Jessica's stomach twisted with nerves. She half expected to see David sitting at the table, cracking jokes and soaking up the spotlight like always. But he wasn't there. Just her parents. Her mom stood when she arrived, her smile unsure. Her dad looked like he'd spent the whole day rehearsing what to say. Jessica sat down across from them, her guard still up. The conversation started awkwardly, small talk, polite questions. She answered in short, careful sentences, waiting for the moment when they'd shift back to old habits, asking about David's job, his girlfriend, his latest accomplishment. But it never came. Instead, her mom leaned forward, her hands wrapped tightly around her glass of water. "So, how's work?" she asked softly. "Is it still crazy busy?" Jessica blinked, surprised. Her dad chimed in. "You mentioned last time you were thinking about taking that management position. Did you decide?" Jessica hesitated, unsure how to respond, because for the first time in years they were asking about her. Not about David. Not about themselves. Dinner wasn't perfect. The conversation was stilted at times, clumsy and full of long pauses. But there was something different in the way they looked at her, like they were finally seeing her. When the meal ended, her mom reached across the table, her voice quiet. "We've been thinking a lot about what you said," she said carefully. "And about how we've treated you." Jessica met her gaze, her walls still up but cracking. Her dad nodded beside her. "We're trying, Jessica. We know it'll take time. But we want to do better." For the first time in her life, Jessica believed them. Maybe they wouldn't get it right all at once. Maybe there were still miles to go. But tonight was the first step. The weeks that followed that awkward dinner felt strange. Jessica didn't know what she had expected. Maybe that her parents would slip back into their old ways. Maybe that the dinner was just a one-time attempt to ease their guilt. And for a while it felt like nothing had changed. Conversations were still awkward, fumbling. Her mom would reach out but didn't always know what to say. Her dad still struggled to get more than a few words out without clearing his throat like he was swallowing something heavy. They weren't good at this. Showing up. At seeing her. But then, small things started to shift. It happened on a quiet Wednesday morning, when Jessica's phone buzzed at exactly 10 o'clock. A message from her mom. "Happy birthday, sweetheart. We're making dinner tonight if you're free. Your favorite, lasagna." Jessica stared at the screen for a long moment. Her birthday. They had remembered. She almost didn't go. She almost told herself it was too little, too late. But that night, when she walked through their front door, she saw the effort. Small cake on the table. A handwritten card, clumsy but heartfelt. Her dad greeting her at the door with an awkward, "Hey kiddo, happy birthday." It wasn't grand. It wasn't perfect. But it was different. A few weeks later, Jessica had a big presentation at work, one she had casually mentioned over dinner, not expecting anyone to care. She was pacing outside the meeting room that morning, nerves coiled tight in her stomach, when her phone buzzed. A message from her mom. "Thinking of you today. You're going to do great." Followed by one from her dad. "Proud of you, kid. No matter what." Jessica stared at the texts, something sharp and warm settling in her chest. They had never done that before. They weren't asking for anything. They weren't reminding her of David. They were just showing up. Slowly, steadily, the pattern continued. Her mom would text her out of the blue, just to ask how her day was. Her dad would leave voicemails, stumbling over his words but making sure she knew he was thinking of her. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments when her mom would default to talking about David, catching herself halfway through. Times when her dad would fall silent, unsure how to bridge the distance they had built over years. But the difference was, they noticed. They stopped. They tried again. They apologized. And Jessica realized something she had never expected. They were learning. Not because she had yelled or begged or bent over backward to earn their love, but because, for the first time, she had stepped away and made them do the work. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't overnight. But it was real. Every little change, every awkward text, every fumbling phone call. It was proof that they were finally, slowly trying to see her. For the first time in her life, Jessica felt something she hadn't known she needed. She felt seen. For most of her life, Jessica had waited. She had waited for her parents to see her. Waited for them to remember her birthday. Waited for them to care without her having to earn it. But something had shifted. Weeks turned into months, and though her parents were trying, awkward texts, surprise dinners, small gestures she'd never received before, Jessica realized she wasn't waiting anymore. Because she had stopped needing their approval. One Friday night, she sat at her kitchen table, a steaming cup of tea beside her, her laptop open. She had spent so much of her life working to be included in their plans. Now, for the first time, she was making plans of her own. Her cursor hovered over the screen as she filled out the final details. A round-trip flight to Italy. 10 days. No family. No obligations. Just her. She clicked book now, her heart thudding, not with fear but with something new. Excitement. She didn't tell her parents right away. Not because she was hiding it, but because, for once, she wasn't asking for permission. When her mom found out a week later, it wasn't from Jessica. It was from a casual conversation over dinner, when she mentioned she needed to shop for a new suitcase. Her mom's eyes widened. A suitcase? Where are you going? Jessica shrugged, her voice light. Italy. For a moment, her mom said nothing. Jessica braced herself, waiting for the usual barrage of questions. Why? When? Are you sure? But instead, her mom smiled, soft and genuine. That sounds incredible, she said. Do you need help packing? Her dad nodded beside her. You've always wanted to go, right? Jessica blinked, surprised. There was no judgment. No attempt to talk her out of it. Just support. 2 days before her flight, her phone buzzed with a message from David. She almost didn't open it. Their relationship had been distant lately, fragile and careful. But curiosity won. Mom told me about your trip. Dali, huh? You're really living your life now. I respect that. Jessica stared at the message for a long moment. She didn't reply right away. She didn't need to. The day of her flight, she stood at the gate, her suitcase at her side, her passport in hand. She looked around at the other travelers, couples, families, groups of friends, and smiled to herself. For the first time, she wasn't the one left behind. She was the one choosing. As the plane lifted off the ground, Jessica glanced out the window, the city shrinking beneath her. She thought about the girl she had been, the one who worked overtime, bent herself backwards, and waited endlessly to be seen. That girl wasn't sitting on this plane. Because Jessica had finally learned the truth. It wasn't her family's approval that had made her worthy. It wasn't their attention that defined her. It was this choice. To live for herself. As the clouds stretched out before her and the horizon opened wide, Jessica smiled quietly to herself. She wasn't the forgotten one anymore. Not because they had changed, but because she had. The streets of Rome buzzed around Jessica like a living heartbeat, the distant hum of scooters weaving through cobblestone alleys, the laughter of tourists spilling out of cafes, the scent of fresh espresso and warm bread drifting through the air. She sat alone at a small table outside a corner cafe, a half-finished cappuccino beside her and a journal open in front of her. For the first time in a long, long time, her shoulders were relaxed, her heart light. The city felt alive, and so did she. It had been a week since she arrived. A week of wandering through ancient streets, getting lost on purpose, taking photos not for anyone else but for herself. She hadn't thought much about home, about them. She hadn't checked her phone constantly. Hadn't wondered what her parents were thinking or whether David was talking about her. She had been too busy living. Her phone buzzed beside her, pulling her from her thoughts. She glanced at the screen without much interest, until she saw the names on the notification. A group message. From her parents. Her heart fluttered unexpectedly as she unlocked it. We just saw your photos. Illy looks amazing. Call us soon. We miss you. Jessica stared at the message, the words settling over her like the warmth of the late afternoon sun. A few months ago, a message like that would have undone her. She would have clung to it, read it over and over, let it fill the aching space inside her that had spent years begging to be seen, to be loved, to be chosen. But now, she smiled. Not because she finally felt like she belonged. Not because she needed them to say they missed her. But because she knew something now. The family she had spent so long chasing. The love she had worked herself raw to earn. It had never been something she had to fight for. It had only appeared the moment she stopped waiting for them to see her and finally chose herself. Jessica took one last sip of her cappuccino, tucking her phone back into her bag without replying right away. She didn't feel the need to. Not because she was angry. Not because she wanted to punish them. But because, for the first time in her life, she wasn't living her life hoping they'd notice. She was living it for herself. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the terracotta rooftops and the streets glowed gold, she sat on her hotel balcony and looked back at her phone one more time. She opened the message again, rereading the words. We miss you. And for the first time she believed them. Not because they'd said it, but because now she knew that whether they saw her or not, it mattered. Her worth had never been theirs to give. It had always been hers to claim. With a small smile, she opened the group chat and typed a reply. Rome is beautiful. I'll call when I get back. Then she set her phone down, leaned back in her chair, and watched the city lights flicker to life. For the first time in her life, Jessica wasn't waiting. She was exactly where she was meant to be. And that's the story of Revenge Jessica. A woman who spent her whole life waiting to be seen, only to realize she had to choose herself first before anyone else could. If there's one thing this story teaches us, it's this. You should never have to beg for love, for attention, or to be included. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away and start living for yourself. Because when you stop chasing people who never valued you, that's when you finally make space for those who will. Thank you so much for staying until the end and listening to Jessica's story. Now I want to hear from you. What's your biggest takeaway from this story? Have you ever felt like Jessica, invisible in your own family, or left out by the people who should have cared the most? Tell me how this story made you feel in the comments below. I read every single one. And don't forget, if you enjoyed this story, please give it a like, share it with someone who needs to hear this, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next powerful story we share. Until next time, take care and remember you matter.